Call the meeting of County Council to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. First is an optional prayer by Mrs. Lull.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let us pray. You can't undo the done. You can't unhear the heard. You can't unsay the said. We need to plant seeds of hope and understanding throughout our day and in our lives. We should not choke out the ideas of others and demand that all be done our way. There are always more ideas to be heard. Do not allow the new to be hushed but explored. Help us and others to calm down and communicate. We may find a new way. We ask this in our Savior's name, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Mr. Smith, roll call, please.
Mr. Anderson?
Here.
Mrs. Fatika?
Here.
Mr. Horton?
Here.
Mr. Leone?
Here.
Mrs. Law?
Here.
Mr. Rastetter?
Here.
Dr. Faust?
Here. Hearing the public, anybody who called in, which it was not the case this week, would have gotten 5 minutes. Anybody that is here tonight that wishes to speak on a topic of their choosing will get 3 minutes. Would anybody like to come forward to speak and address council tonight? We'll get to everybody, so you don't have to worry about rushing up. You can take your time.
Hi, my name is
Good
Elspeth
If you
Kaling.
could, give us your name and the municipality you live in, and then you'll have 3 minutes thereafter. Thank you.
Elspeth Kaling, Erie City. This is my son, Ari Phillips.
Welcome.
We came up here to talk to you guys about CBAs and equitable development. When growth and revitalization happen without including all residents or creating family-sustaining jobs, that's not sustainable. It's no surprise that our population is declining, as we saw in that story that came out, I believe it was yesterday. I urge the county to implement measures to guarantee equity and development. Erie County residents can't survive without quality education and then a hope for a good paying job when they're done with that education. Focusing only on developers' needs and those who have deep pockets will eventually lead to a collapse, creating conditions that are way worse than what they are now. I urge you to act proactively now before it's really, really too late. And what do we need?
We need CBAs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to come forward tonight?
Good evening, council members. My name is Richard Connor. I reside at 2116 East 41st Street, Erie, Pennsylvania. And for the last 25 years, I've attempted to provide affordable housing for low-income people who ordinarily and sometimes can't get into public housing for various reasons. Needless to say, that does cause some complications. I got caught up in a tax sale. I have some properties that I operate and have a warehouse. And my wife has been sick and I was a little off kilter and I missed the date. But I came down here within 2 hours of the sale and I offered to reimburse whoever purchased the property. And I didn't get the consideration that I thought I should have gotten, but maybe it's the way it operates. But it would cause me a terrible inconvenience to lose my warehouse. Matter of fact, it would put me out of business. So what I'm doing here today is just asking council to please look into it, and if you could. I did Google something regarding the law of the state. They said you could redeem your property after a sale, but I haven't yet, as of yet, got the information as to how it could be done. I did offer the money, but if you could look into it, I'd appreciate it.
We will do that.
Thank you very much.
We have his address. We have your name and address through the property. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. If you could give Danae, if you could state the address of the warehouse. Good point.
It's 2010 Buffalo Road, right next to the JFK Center.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wood. Anybody else from the public wish to be heard tonight, please come forward.
Good evening, Council. My name is Veronica Rexford. I reside in Mill Creek at 4124 Westridge Road. I would like to echo the concerns that Elspeth brought to the fore today about equitable development. The rising tide doesn't lift all boats without intentionality. I was at a council meeting downtown, and a council member that I won't name had a thought process about how development should work, or how it does work, and how it's going to keep working. And that was, he who has the gold makes the rules. You can't allow that to happen. County council can't allow it, and city council can't allow it. Being for community benefit agreements is not against development. It's for fair development. It's for bringing along the local community, the people who live in the neighborhoods, providing the job training, negotiating with the developers, and coming to an agreement that's fair for even people on the bottom. We know how many people we have living on the bottom in Erie, be it low income, be it in 16501, be it minority residents, catching an extra hard break. I believe that it's your job to stand in the gap between moneyed interests and the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, Council. My name is Darnell Stallworth. I reside at 956 West 26th Street. I'm in full agreement of the CBA. I come to support the CBA. This is my first time ever coming to the County Council, and I feel it's important that I speak on behalf of those that want the CBA. You know, I would ask that you take a good long look at what's being proposed. It seems almost as if we're giving our city away, in a way. I almost feel like somewhere, somehow, like somewhere this corruption or something just ain't right, because it's almost common sense for us to adopt a CBA. Why wouldn't you want to adopt a CBA? So that's what I wanted to say. Like, if not, then why? Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public wish to come forward tonight?
Hi, I'm Kathy Lutz. I reside at 709 California Drive in Mill Creek. And I echo what they say about community benefit agreements and the importance of that. But in particular, my concern has to do with housing, affordable housing, and families who get displaced when we begin all the development and we start creating condos and fair market rent and disposing people from the housing that they have now. The gentleman who provides housing, rental properties, for those people who can't get into subsidized or Section 8 housing, he's providing a blessing to this community. In Erie County, the last time I checked, there was a waiting list for 900 for people waiting for subsidized housing. Those are people who have already met all of the requirements. You know, they've passed the application process. They've passed, you know, the check of their credit and all of that. There's no housing for them. And in Erie City, it's greater than that. It's more than 800 for the subsidized housing, and it's at least a 2-year waiting list for Section 8. So we already don't have enough adequate housing for families who don't have any money. And, you know, what he's providing is so necessary. So when we're talking about creating fair market housing and condos and all of that downtown, and the possibility of closing places like Richford Arms, where everybody in there is on Section 8 housing, where are they going? What is the plan? And that's really all I really want to know is, what is the plan? I go to city council and they don't have a plan. I go to county council, I'm not aware of any plan that you have. I think you just think that those people are just going to walk into some other housing somewhere, and they don't have any money to walk into housing. I work as an advocate in this community for families who have children with disabilities. Some of those families are in completely inadequate housing and have no way of getting out. So I just want to make sure you all are aware of that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Anybody else from the public wish to be heard tonight? Go right ahead.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name's Keith Wallach, 121 East 35th Street, City of Erie. This is mainly aimed at whoever the liaison is for the airport. And I don't know.
That's Mrs. Fatika.
Mrs. Fatika. It seems like they made a really good appointment. I believe it's Mr. Martin from, and he was Director of Operations in Detroit. Just try to give him all the support you can. We have that runway extension, of course, it's been done for years, and it seems like we have less flights out than we did before. And I'm hoping with his experience at a big airport, he could use his connections to get us more flights, more destinations. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else from the public wish to be heard tonight? Seeing no one come forward, do I have a motion to approve the minutes of the September 18th meeting? Moved by Mr. Leon and seconded by Mr. Horton. Are there any corrections or changes to those minutes? Mr. Smith, roll call, please.
On the minutes, Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Dr. Faust.
Yes. Reports of county officials, the county executive or her designee, Mr. Sparber.
None tonight.
Thank you. Finance Committee, Mrs. Fatika.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Finance Committee met on September 27th and agreed to put on the agenda under old business items A and under new business items A, B, and E. That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions for Mrs. Fatika? Personnel Committee, Mr. Horton.
Sure. Personnel Committee met also on Thursday, September 27, 2018, at 4 p.m., and we agreed to put the following items on tonight's agenda. There will be 6 items total. The first 2 are companion items dealing with active shooter training, and items 3, 4, 5, and 6 are possible appointments to the EMTA authority.
No, we had to put those on the agenda.
Oh,
We tabled those.
we tabled those.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Horton? Thank you. And then reports of other members of council. Mr. Horton, you expressed the
Yes.
desire to give a report.
Good evening, council and resident citizens of Erie County. It's been 333 days since the 24 Wall Street article declaring Erie, PA as the worst city in America. And once again, I come to say, sadly, the silence is deafening. Nothing has been said, much less done. Once again, by myself, by my colleagues on this body, by the administration, by city council, by the outgoing mayor, senate, or the incoming mayor, Schember. by all of our state delegations, whether it's Kurt Sony, Brad Rowe, rest in peace, Flo Fabrizio, whether it's Ryan Bizzaro, the silence is deafening. We haven't heard from Senator Laughlin. The silence is deafening. We haven't heard from Senator Casey. We haven't heard from the governor or anyone aspiring to run for the office of the governorship from either party. And it's heartbreaking. The response that I keep getting to the question, sadly, is on how we fix it is tax abatements. It's corporate giveaways, as if the federal Trump tax cuts weren't enough, that were granted into perpetuity. Citizens are suffering in Erie County, particularly within the 2nd Legislative District, where I represent. The Lower East Bay Front and the Lower West Bay Front. I have 4 public housing tracts. I have the Harbor Homes projects. I have the Franklin Terrace projects. I have the 19th Street Townie projects. I have the Bird Drive projects. I have the 16501, poor zip code in the Commonwealth. I also have Ground Zero, the epicenter for all of the development along the Bayfront, which I am pleased as punch to see occurring. I am not anti-development. I do believe that change is necessary. But I also believe in good corporate citizenship and good corporate stewardship. I don't believe that there should be a citywide LRTA to encompass the waterfront and those areas of our city that are not blighted. I believe that LRTA specifically deals with blight. So when we're in a city that has a school district where 100% of the children in the Erie's public school districts are eligible for free lunches. They're crowded in the hallways through changing classes and in the classrooms. 2 high schools have closed, possibly going to shut other middle schools. And I think it's immoral to give away our tax base. I'm not understanding it. I look at the Erie Comprehensive Plan. It says, well, we want to bring in, we have a declining tax base. We want to bring in millennials, and we want to attract businesses and lift our tax base. It says nothing about what they're going to do, as Ms. Lutz alluded to, the people in the high rises, whether it's Richford Arms or Schmidt Towers or Friendship Towers or Methodist Towers or Powell Hardware. Let's say where those people are going to go for affordable housing. I haven't seen the plan either, where they're going. There's not a supermarket below 26th Street on the east or west bluff. Yesterday, another report came out. I think there were 518 cities on it. We were ranked 515th as slowest to develop. Now, don't get me wrong. Like I said, there's really a lot of good development going on, and we truly need that. CBAs. The county says we don't have any money. We're going into our reserves to balance the budget. We just received the budget proposal this year. City says they don't have any money. They have a $1+ million deficit because they had inflated sewer revenue projections. We know the school district doesn't have any money because they're under financial watch. Yet, we have the unmitigated gall, the audacity to even consider giving tax breaks on the waterfront and in rich neighborhoods to the haves at the expense of the have-nots. I think it's immoral to give away RACP funding in conjunction with LRTA, 10-year tax abatements. Generally, I come up here and I speak in vagaries, but I understand that one of my friends came out and said that he's against CBAs. And so I'd like to say to that friend, Bishop Brock, that maybe if you understood what CBAs were, your position would change. Sadly, you spoke honestly. He spoke honestly in the paper. He's not interested in CBAs. He's interested in people investing in him, which I thought was a selfish approach, which are so many people are suffering in our community. These aren't the rantings or the ravings of someone who, because of a personal tragedy that my wife and I, these are the astute observations of someone who has family members, who has sons, who has nephews, who has a daughter, who has cousins who suffer from poverty. Not because they're lazy and they don't work. It's hard to work 2 or 3 minimum wage jobs and still be a good parent. But he says we don't need CBAs. I submit to him for argument, sadly, that we do. And I would welcome a discussion, however public or private, with the bishop to that end. The United Way receives large portions of its funding from working men and women through organized labor. Recently, they've redirected their funding or changed the way that the paradigm to the way that they're going to do things, and they're investing in pre-K, which is great, in the community schools. Sadly, it's at the expense of many of those working people, those contributors' families, the seniors. Many of them have elderly parents, children, sons and daughters. The neighborhood centers seem to languish while being asked to make bricks without straw. Yet we give away corporate welfare in the form of abatements or zoning changes. We give it away to people that feel that they are not responsible to be good stewards in the community, and that all the while they gentrify and benefit off the backs of poor people and off the backs of those who can least speak up for themselves. They say no money, we say CBAs. I submit to you for argument that if we put in millions and millions of dollars and we float the type of bonds that we floated to pay for infrastructure, and we considering giving tax abatements to the waterfront while we have a $600 million proposed development at Erie Events parcel of land, I think it's crazy. Now, I'm not a mathematician. Maybe Mr. Sparber or someone could figure out what that tax would be on $600 million piece of property over 10 years, while we tell the neighborhood centers we don't have $20,000 to sustain a program. Maybe someone can explain to me why Mr. Scott, how much did Summit Township give to build his 12 hotels or however many restaurants? Because I think it's probably zero. Yet $5 million in RACP funds, and he says, oh, by the way, I need a 10-year tax break. While our sons and daughters are dying in the street. Mine, literally. We have opiate problem, people overdosing. We don't have tax dollars, but we're going to give away our tax base. So it must be addition by subtraction. Give it all away in hopes that it will come back, and it'll come back to you. But I don't see it. And I think before we go one step further down that road, that it should be a transparent process, and that they should have public hearings on LRTA, and they should let the people decide, and they should explain to the people what a citywide LRTA means. And it's not enough to just say, oh, I want to bring jobs, as the mayor told me. because 14 or 15 made jobs, while we're appreciative of house servant jobs and it's meaningful work, we're interested in family sustaining jobs, and we're interested in getting a better ROI, or return on investment, for the money that we're giving. And so I will be coming. I won't just come here and rant. I'll come here offering solutions. I'll come here and I'll ask to lower the age for summer jobs program to include more youth. I'll come in here and I'll ask our solicitor to investigate whether we can approach an entertainment tax on Erie events, $1 surcharge to be split amongst all 3 taxing bodies, to be put in training, the county's portions. At least if we're going to give it all away, we should get something back from them. I'll come in here and I'll propose solutions. I was glad Governor Wolf came, dropped $12 million in the state. Erie events, $1 billion worth of assets. And the Warner Theater, Jerry Park, Erie Insurance Arena, Convention Center Authority. The Convention Center itself. They have the Sheraton that doesn't pay taxes. They have Marriott, doesn't pay taxes, or anything else they'll build that continuous to the Convention Center itself won't pay taxes. And now we're prepared to authorize on the mixed-use development another 10-year tax break. And so if you're not here at the meeting tonight, if you are here at the meeting tonight, if you watch it on County Council, you should come back here at next meeting, because I submit to you in my closing that there's nothing on this agenda tonight that will speak to any of those issues. I submit to you for argument that if you go over to a city, and I looked at their agenda, they'll talk about what to do with poor people, how to stop them from drinking in their own backyard without a permit. And they'll talk about how to stop them from panhandling, when really the panhandling it's people working 2 jobs out there panhandling, trying to keep from robbing people to feed their family. Is it wrong? Definitely wrong. Should it happen? No, it should never happen. Does it happen? Yes. And so while all the haves are benefiting from all the great development, the have-nots, I'm asking you to come down to County Council. If you want to have a public hearing, I'll host one. But every taxing body in here, in this area, school, city, or county, we shouldn't be giving away our tax dollars while we're digging in our reserves and finding other ways and means to pay for things. Because what's next? We're going to tax the people again while we still give corporate giveaways. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your patience. My colleagues, thank you. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Horton. I just have a short report. I didn't have a chance to get to it in the back. 2 personnel-related items have come about that directly impact council. One is that all of us know we lost our CPA to retirement at the end of January, February, I can't remember what it was. And we did seek requests for proposals to replace Mr. Maloney. We did receive one a couple weeks ago. We interviewed the gentleman who was local, and he withdrew his consideration not long thereafter. In the meantime, through assistance from the administration too, with some of our auditing firms in the past, we came across an outfit, Zella and Frosky, I think it is, an Axelrod, and Sachs from Susquehanna, I think is what it's right. And Mrs. Fatika as the chair of finance, myself, Doug Smith, and Joe Maloney met with them today. They're going to put together a proposal for us. They certainly have the expertise that we're looking for. Whether they can be in the right price range for us, I guess, we will have to see exactly what they have in mind. But they expect to have that, I think, by Friday, did they say? And we'll present that to the full council at that time, and then invite them in if they are still inclined to come in and present to the whole council to explain what they have in mind, what they can offer, and what their rate may be. And then the other issue is getting the Human Relations Commission back up and running. The applications have been received. We received 6 for the director's job. 11 for the administrative assistance job. And as the chair of council, I'm going to serve on that committee. I'm also the liaison to the Human Relations Commission, the hiring committee. I've asked Mrs. Fatika to serve on that committee as well, and also Mr. Horton. And the one thing I couldn't get to, and they both agreed, that I would just like to have a short discussion with both of you and Mr. Smith just to discuss how we go about the next steps, because we would like to try to begin those interviews for both positions next week. Okay? Okay, so with that, we will move on to old business and have a second reading of ordinance number 124, please, in title only, Mr. Smith.
A second reading of ordinance number 124, 2018, amending ordinance number 94 of 2018, creation of policy for disposition of grants to other organizations, funding from gaming or the general fund.
Mr. Chairman,
Mrs. Lowe.
is this, at this time, I'd either like to put this up for a vote, or I have an amendment I'd like to make. Which-
Well, we got to get on the floor first.
Okay, then I'd like to put it up for vote.
Moved by Mrs. Lowell, is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Anderson. Discussion, Mrs. Lowell.
Okay, I have an amendment I'd like to add to this. We have presented a new addendum to this since the first reading of this, so I'd like to change it by adding that new addendum. And then under the original grant guidelines, the third point, to add other applicable sections to that particular thing. So I'd like to make that motion.
I'll second.
Regarding the addendum, what are you adding or changing?
It's the last two pages that were on, that we had on during the finance.
But what specifically are you changing? Oh, you want to add those?
I want
you're
to
adding
add
that-
these two pages.
Because you're adding that to the original ordinance.
Correct.
Right, I
Yes,
misunderstood
yes.
what you were asking. Okay.
I might have stated that improperly.
Okay, that has been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on that amendment of this particular ordinance? I will just say that I am going to vote against it. I think all of you are aware of that, and I'll give my comments about that when we get to the full ordinance in a minute. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I think there was also a change on, under point 1 on page 2, under ineligible uses. I don't know if Mrs. Lowell mentioned that one.
It was on page 1, and then under point 1, there was another one?
If you look under ineligible uses, there's an emboldened phrase there. You just
Oh,
would want to-
personal cell phone.
You just
Okay, I'm
want to
sorry, I didn't
include
even know
that
about
in
that.
your
Thank you,
motion.
sir.
Yes.
Thank you. So I'd like to add that.
Carl, you want to second that motion just to upgrade it? Or would you be included?
I will second.
Okay, so that's been further, or fully moved and seconded, so any further discussion on the amendment of this ordinance? Mr. Smith, roll call, please.
On the amendment to ordinance 124, Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
No.
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Mrs. Lowell,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
No. Any further discussion on this ordinance? Mr. Horton?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't be voting with the affirmative on this. I'll be voting no. As to the advice and consent of the opinion given by our solicitor. So my vote tonight will be a no.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Rastetter?
Yeah, I think somehow we've all gotten off on the wrong track about this thing. Nobody in our little clique wants to destroy ECRA or anybody on their board. All we're interested in is bringing them in line to not use taxpayer money on their own personal gain. And I don't see how anybody can defend that position or believe that that helps the public in any way, whether they be rich or poor. You know, it doesn't make any sense. Unless they're on the board, then how do they profit from that? And I think anybody that wants to vote to let them keep doing that must have some other stake in it. So I'm going to be voting yes, even though the solicitor seems to think that we're all wrong. I'm sure this will all work out and the truth will prevail. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Anderson?
I just wanted to state that what is the goal of this, as has been with the original ordinance put forward and passed, is to make it fair across the board and make everybody aware in the community that county council takes its fiscal responsibility seriously, and that this ordinance is a good ordinance as amended, which will put more money into the community through grants that are received through AGRA and through the land bank, helping those in need, helping those that are disadvantaged in our community, and ensuring that that money is distributed in a fair manner with fiscal responsibility and accountability at the heart of the issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Well, yeah, I'm going to go through a few things here that I don't want to belabor the point. But there isn't any grant, any organization that anybody on this council or anybody in the community for that matter can point to that ECRA has dispensed improperly or unethically. There's been lots of disagreement on their operational expenses as to whether they made good choices or bad choices with the things that they did. And the state has taken care really of the largest one anyway with the tuition. I've never defended the tuition or the bonus, and I will give you the examples of how I have not. Regarding the tuition payments, we did not, that really didn't become public till May, or, the meeting with Senator Laughlin was in June of 2017, and following that meeting, I advised my particular appointment to ECRA that this is a practice that ought to be stopped as soon as possible, and before that full discussion even took place, Mr. Wood withdrew his interest in having his tuition reimbursed. And last week, Mr. Barnes brought up all sorts of examples of how that agreement was violated, but he was citing examples from April and March, and I think in February. So that timeline is out of order. So it's not as if that was violated. We've more than once we've brought up $3 expenditures to Country Fair, $9 expenditures to Office Max, as if these are egregious misappropriations of funds. Well, I asked Mr. Wood, what are these expenses all about? Things like getting coffee, creamer for the office, an office supply that many people have expense for. Getting water, so when they do have events, I was one out at Northeast where it was about 95 degrees with the humidity, and they gave water to the principals that attended. Office Max, I'm not sure what we thought they would be getting at Office Max, but it sounds like office supplies on its face, and it was to get a stamp for the office as to, from the desk up or whatever the heck it was. I can't even remember what he said. The other examples that have been brought up, they've been brought up ad nauseum, and I'm not defending them, but I will give you the reasons why ECRA has stated they did certain things regarding the Pennsylvania Society. If you recall, that was, and Mrs. Lull has brought up a couple times how the budget operationally seemed out of whack, and now it's back in line a little bit. That's because a lot of those expenditures that were taken out were one-time things. The Pennsylvania Society was one of them. The reasoning for that is at that time, if you recall, gaming was in peril as to what we would have as state law. And the reason why Mr. Wood and I went to the Pennsylvania Society, that's where all the state reps and senators are at that time. It was a good way to meet them and to interact with them on maybe a more informal basis to try to advocate for them to keep gaming as it was. The other big expense was the economic impact report, which was $50,000, which again was only created because gaming funds were really in peril, not just in Erie County, across the state. And that's a report that was heralded by the State Gaming Committee, by the chairman anyway, as the best report he has seen regarding gaming. This For two reasons, however, despite all that, you can agree with that, you can tell me I'm full of it, whatever you want. It isn't gonna bother me. But for two reasons why we should vote this down. One, our solicitor twice now has said we are overreaching legally what our responsibilities are. We shouldn't ignore that. This will be the third time this year we do, if we decide to do that, which I think is once is a dangerous precedent, three times is a dangerous trend. And two, by their own admission of the people who put this ordinance together, they have stated that it impacts the operational funds, which is illegal, and it violates the court-ordered settlement. And two, they've admitted out loud that ECRA doesn't necessarily have to follow it. We shouldn't be passing ordinances that people don't necessarily have to follow. You can call it the spirit of cooperation if you want, but when your remedy is to disband the authority, that's not a spirit of cooperation with all due respect. That's a spirit of coercion. That's you either do what we say you need to do, or we're gonna get rid of you. And if council, if their infinite wisdom wants to do that, I think you're gonna find out that more of this community than not is gonna feel that we're wasting time and we're wasting valuable tax dollars to try to achieve that end, when in the end, ECRA on the whole, I think has done a lot of good for this community. If you add all these, what I will call fiscal grievances against ECRA, they amount to one less than 1/5 of 1/100%. It is a small amount of money. I'm not excusing away what was done. Some things have been corrected. I think like any authority, they've had growing pains. They've made mistakes and missteps and things that I think looking back, they wish they would have done differently. But on the whole, they have done a pretty good job. And this is an overreach by council. It is stated as such by our solicitor and not to be voted down. With that, Mr. Smith, we're going to go to the roll call. Everybody's had a chance to speak.
Okay.
On ordinance 124, Mr. Horton,
No.
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
No. Do I have a motion to amend tonight's agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I'll
Mr. Leon.
move to make second readings of ordinance 125, 126, 127, and 128.
Moved by Mr. Leon.
I'll
Is there a
second.
second? Seconded by Mrs. Lowell to amend tonight's agenda. Is there any further discussion regarding the amendment of tonight's agenda? Mr. Smith, roll call, please.
On the motion to amend, Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes. Okay, actually, and for those of you that are new to our meetings, on the screen is a short review, a little bit more than what you would see in your agenda if you have one in front of you as to what we are doing. Ordinances require two readings, oftentimes because they're pretty, there's, not a lot to address to it. There's no sense waiting to take advantage of what the ordinance will allow us to do. We move it to a second reading, as we have just done for final passage with these four. We still have to vote individually on them. And then resolutions require just one reading. So that's why you won't see that type of motion with that. So with that, Mr. Smith, a second reading of ordinance number 125.
second reading of ordinance number 125, 2018, 46, 2018 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $3,386, and new line item for PCOMP safety improvement grant.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Horton and seconded by Mr. Leon. Is there any discussion? Mr. Smith, roll call, please.
On ordinance 125, Mrs. Law,
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 126, please, in title only.
the second reading of ordinance number 126, 2018, 47th, 2018 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $31,745 and new line item for AOPC grant to purchase video conferencing equipment.
So move.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Leon and seconded by Mrs. Fatika. Is there any discussion? Mr. Smith, roll call, please.
On ordinance 126, Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 127, please, on title only.
a second reading of ordinance number 127, 2018, 48th, 2018 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $55,000 for active shooter training of courthouse personnel.
So move.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Horton and seconded by Mr. Leone. Is there any discussion? Mr. Smith, roll call, please.
On ordinance 127, Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 128, please, in title only.
a second reading of ordinance number 128, 2018, 49th, 2018 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation and transfer of $35,000 for active shooter training of courthouse personnel.
So move.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Horton and seconded by Mr. Leone. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Anderson.
just as a point of clarification, and not that this will change what we're voting on tonight, but rather than active shooter training, it should be actually the title is active assailant training, because it can be more than just shooting. It could be, in this environment, knives, cars, bombing, etc. So for next year, we should perhaps clarify with the Sheriff's Department in including those other elements. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Mr. Smith, roll call.
On ordinance 128, Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes, regarding resolution number 50, Mr. Leone.
Thank you. I'll read the resolution in its entirety. Be resolved by the County Council of Erie County pursuant to Article 2, Section 1A, 3C8, and 3B1 of the Home Rule Charter for the County of Erie, in accordance with Resolution Number 30, 1993, and Resolution Number 49, 1993, that the pilot payment in lieu of taxes agreement with the below-listed entities are hereby approved as outlined on the attached Exhibit A. Ridgeberry Apartments, Maryville Apartment, Freedom Square, Goodrich House, Cascade Run Incorporated, Flagship City Apartments Incorporated, Hands City Center Apartments Incorporated, Hands Metro Apartments Incorporated, Cool Apartments Incorporated, Liberty Place Apartments Incorporated, Niagara Apartments Incorporated, North Coast Place Apartments Incorporated, Popular Place Incorporated, Pox Apartments Incorporated, Rosewood Apartments Incorporated, and Titus House Incorporated. Also moved, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by
Second.
Mr. Leone, seconded by Mr. Horton. I wasn't expecting such a formal reading.
Well,
Mr. Smith's worried about his job. Any further discussion on the pilot agreements? These are all Hands properties, so that's why we decided to do them all in one motion. Mr. Smith, roll call, please.
On resolution number 50, Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes, Mr. Horton, you wish to say something before we adjourn?
Yes, probably the most important person that I see in the room is a young man, the student, and I want to acknowledge him. I did get a brief opportunity to find out what his business was here at the county seat, and he informed me that he's in pursuit of a badge for a scout troop. And I'd like to just give him an opportunity to say something before we leave, or if he doesn't want to say anything, I'm going to welcome you to Erie County.
Thank you. Good luck to you.
Move to adjourn.
Council stands adjourned. Thank you.